A look back at the life and musical legacy of Tom Petty and proof that his music will live on for decades to come. That's coming up next on Booked on Rock. Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. I'm Eric Senich. Gillian Gaar back on the podcast. Her latest book is called Tom Petty, The Life and Music. Great to have you back, Gillian. How are you?
It's great to be here.
When did you first discover Tom Petty's music? Was there a specific song or an album that hooked you in?
Well, I think it was Damn the Torpedoes because that was just, if you were there, it was just kind of everywhere. It had a couple albums out before, and I think American Girl came out before then, didn't it? And so, yeah, you heard that on the radio, but that was like the big explosion, and you saw the big posters. Anytime you went into a music store, if you went to a music store that year, you saw a poster of that album on the wall or in the window, guaranteed. So, he quickly became one of those artists that you knew who he was, even if you never owned any of his records or weren't interested, you knew who he was because he was, well, that was the album that put him over the top, finally, to his relief and the band members' relief too, I'm sure.
Yeah, for me, it was late 80s. It was actually Full Moon Fever.
Ah,
And my older brother had a lot of his stuff, a lot of the albums. And so I really invested in all the back catalog after getting turned on to the video for I Won't Back Down and Free Fallin'. And I knew he had hits before that, but I just didn't realize what a body of work that he had and how far it went back. And of course, Damn the Torpedoes that's the one you had to get. First, let's go back to his childhood. You write in the chapter that covers his childhood, quote, on the surface, the Pettys appeared to be just another ordinary happy family. But in reality, Tom Petty's childhood was more like a tale of Southern Gothic horror. Talk about the early years growing up in Gainesville, Florida in the 50s and the 60s. What was that like for Tom Petty?
well, I didn't really know much of his background until doing this book. So, yeah, it was kind of horrifying to read about this awful childhood that he had, or difficult, I guess one could say, with a father who was physically abusive, quite seriously. I mean, he had welts on his body from being hit with a belt. So, so that's the kind of upbringing that he had. Although one of the sort of amusing things was about that was okay, so he had this obvious conflict with his father. Then as he gets older, it's not necessarily any better because Tom isn't the kind of guy that likes to go out hunting and fishing or play a lot of sports. He's into his music. So his father isn't keen on that. And then he grows his hair long. It's hair was a big controversy with parents and sons in particular back then. And Tom later said that his father had thought that the reason he didn't bring any girlfriends home was because, well, he's probably gay because he has long hair. And the real reason Tom didn't bring any girlfriends home is because it was such a dysfunctional household and he didn't want to bring people home to hang out there. He'd rather be at their homes. So, that was a little amusing there, kind of black humored perhaps. But also, I mean, he did have a harsher beginning than, say, someone like Elvis Presley, who grew up very poor, but did not have that physical abuse. But those difficult upbringings, I find, and you see this again and again with not just musicians but artists and performers, it does kind of instill a drive in you to get out. Some people buckle under and they cave, but then other people, like Elvis or Bruce Springsteen or Tom Petty, they're like, there's got to be something more out there, and I'm going to find it because I'm not staying here.
Yeah, if it's too comfortable there at home, why leave?
Yeah, yeah.
It's funny you mentioned Elvis. Let's talk about the Elvis story, which is
Oh, yeah,
what
that's a good
really
one.
that lit the flame for him, not so much musically, but also in terms of being a performer. Because before he discovered music, he found escape in television. He loved Westerns, and Hollywood was a magical destination for him. And then in the summer of 61, when he's 10 years old, the worlds of rock and roll and Hollywood stardom kind of collide and something happens there. Talk about that. It was his uncle that he met. He got to meet Elvis. His uncle worked on a movie set.
Yeah. Well, I think it just gave him a taste of what the showbiz life was like. And his uncle worked as local crew on film shoots in Florida. They're all in Florida. And Elvis went there to make a movie after his army years, Follow That Dream, which was set in Florida too, so kind of on location. And his uncle says to Tom and some other young relatives, "Would you like to meet Elvis?" And they go, "Okay, sure, that'd be fun." So they're taken over to the film set, and it was in this small town where it was a simple scene where Elvis and his co-star drive up to a bank and they walk into the bank. And there's all these people waiting to watch that. And Tom said he's just kind of dazzled by it all the crowds there. And then the sort of build up as the Cadillacs arrive with Elvis's entourage, the Memphis Mafia. Then Elvis himself arrives and the girls are going crazy. And there, and of course Tom and his aunt and the younger relatives, they're all, off to the side on the crew side of the shoot. So they meet Elvis, and I think Tom said he couldn't even remember what he said to him. But just, and I guess also 10, Elvis is like 6 feet, so that's a giant to you when you're 10 years old. And just seeing the stream of albums that people are sending back to get autographed, and how long it took to shoot this simple scene, which film shoots usually take a while anyway. But this took longer because girls would keep breaking through the barricades and running in and ruining the shot. So they'd have to do it again and again. And when he got back home, his neighbors asking him what it was like, wanting all the details. And he's describing it, and traded his slingshot for a box of 45s that the neighbor kid had with some Elvis 45s in them. So that's really when he started getting interested in Elvis. And he remained a lifelong fan. I mean, well, I guess it's more than a few years ago, that documentary, The Searcher, that came out about Elvis. It's partly narrated, or not narrated, but Tom's one of the interviewees in that movie. And I found, looking around online, oh yeah, I put that in that chapter too. And I think a Rolling Stone article or something, he named his 10 favorite Elvis songs. So, and they're mostly the early songs, as I recall.
Oh, was it? Yeah. His first band he formed because he got the girls by being in a rock and roll band.
Well, they say that's, a big hook for guys. You start a
Right.
band and that's how you meet girls.
Yeah.
Kind of it reminds me in the other book, just to share something else. Bruce Springsteen also noted that girls like to dance. So he taught himself all the dances, or perfected his dance moves. So at the school dances, he could always get a partner because a lot of the other guys, "Oh, I'm not going to learn how to dance. That's sissy stuff." And they're wondering, how does Bruce, this scrawny looking guy who doesn't have the height of fashion on him, why does he get girls? Well, because he knows how to dance.
Yes.
And so,
Exactly.
so yeah, I mean, with Tom, he was talking to a girl. So we're looking for a band to play at our show or wherever, and he says, "Oh, I've got a band, we'll play it." And he didn't have a band at all, which
Right.
that just cracked me up.
Yeah.
Not, "Oh, I think I could get something together." Just, "Oh yeah, I have a band, we'll play at the school," or wherever it was. And they did get a band together. So,
Quickly. Quickly. Yeah. Yeah. And
very,
then
very
eventually,
quickly.
Mudcrutch formed, kind of skipping ahead to get to chapter 6, the birth of the Heartbreakers. And you write in that chapter, quote, Tom was at loose ends. He'd come to LA with his wife, Jane, who gave birth to their daughter, Adria, in November 1974. But now, with Tom having no band, Jane and Adria returned to Florida to live with her family until he could reestablish himself. So talk about what happened with Mudcrutch and how did the Heartbreakers form? Because Mudcrutch was his thing. Like, this was his big break, was going to be with Mudcrutch. Didn't happen.
Yeah, well, they put some couple singles out that just didn't do anything. And the label just lost interest in them, but they wanted to keep working with Tom. So it's kind of like the band got fired in a way. Oh, but we'll still work with Tom, which, that must have made everyone feel a bit awkward. But there, he was kind of stranded in LA. You mentioned his childhood when he's watching shows beamed in from Hollywood and how glamorous it sounded. Well, now he was living in Hollywood and he was on the skids. So he saw the other side of that. And I mean, you walk around Hollywood today and there's, the fancy, some high-end restaurants and stuff, but then there's also the sleazy motels just down the road. So he must have wondered what was going to happen, and various things didn't pan out. Although I guess you could say that was kind of a year in training, because as he played with other musicians, he realized he wanted to get a band together again, and he didn't want to work with studio musicians because he did some things with studio musicians, and he just felt it didn't have the right feel because they're just playing the gig, and then the next session they go on and back somebody else. And he wanted that band feeling, something more organic. And I mean, actually, some of the Mudcrutch guys ended up being in the Heartbreakers.
Right. Well, Mike Campbell and Ben Montench.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And in fact, he showed up at some other session. Was it Campbell's? You have the book there. He showed up at a session, and there were a number of the guys there from Florida and a few ex-Mudcrutchers. And it just worked out so well. They thought, well, hey, let's have this band stay together. Let's make this a band. And it became Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers kind of by default because Tom was still signed to the label because the label was most interested in him. And he didn't necessarily want to be the front man, even though he did do, I guess, all the singing by then. But he said, it makes sense for it to just go like this because I'm the one with the record contract and you join in as backing me and we already have a record deal. So, they went along with that. And I think they'd say it worked out well for them in the end.
Yeah. And he wanted to call them King Bees or the Gainesville All Stars at first, but then Tom having to deal with Shelter, as you mentioned, Shelter Records, the focus was to be on him. So Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, it became in the debut album from 1976, two Petty classics, Breakdown and American Girl. And American Girl is the one, like you write in the book, and you just mentioned about just Tom Petty in general. There are songs by Tom Petty that maybe you don't even know it's by him, but you sure know the song. And American Girl is one of those songs. And there's also in the lyrics, he's alluding to where he came from. I believe you talk about that too, the lyrics in that song.
Yeah, he does make references to like a highway in Florida that goes up the coast. But then he also said later that the sound of the waves was really the sound of the cars he heard living in Hollywood by his own freeway. So it's kind of like a mashup of the California and the Florida experience.
You're Gonna Get It was the second album, and that was the first to go gold. The singles I Need to Know, Listen to Her Heart did well, but it's 79's Damn the Torpedoes, where Petty becomes a huge star. His first album to hit the top 10, the first to go platinum, sales over 1 million. It would eventually sell over 3 million copies in the US. Don't Do Me Like That, Refugee, Here Comes My Girl, and Even the Losers are the singles. The big difference here is that they bring in producer Jimmy Iovine. What was it that Iovine did that made such a positive change while at the same time led to some tension with one member of the band, that being drummer Stan Lynch?
Well, Ivy was, in the early years of what would be a storied career. And he's a guy that has strong opinions. And I think maybe that's what brought him into conflict, not just with the drummer, but with the band too at times. And am I right that he's the one that made Tom upgrade his stereo, that bought him the stereo?
I believe
One of
so.
the
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he comes over to see where Tom's living and he just has, just a modest stereo. And Jimmy's like, no, 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 you need to hear your music. You need to hear your records properly and get some state of the art, up to date stereo system for him. So, he's really concerned with the music and the sound. But yeah, very definite opinions. And it's interesting. Producers often seem to have a lot of trouble with drummers. You hear about that. They'll get on them the hardest, or maybe they're not keeping in time, or they want them to use a click track, and some drummers don't like that because it's just too robotic. So there's that fight between the clean, precise sound and something more organic.
Yeah. And Stan is a pretty opinionated guy himself.
Yeah, yeah, I think we could say that.
Yeah. And so he almost was out of the band. I think there was a point where there's discussion between Petty and Iovine about whether they should replace him, which I'm so glad they didn't because I love Stan Lynch. I love his style. But yeah, he pushed him like several takes over and over and over again until, like you say, not just with Stan, but the whole band. But again, that's what, on the other side of it, that's what makes this album so good.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, that's,
Yeah.
he was really driving them hard to come up with a complete album, and it worked. The book is broken down into 5 parts, and Damn the Torpedoes comes during part 2, which is titled Into the Great Wide Open, 1979 to 1987. And you cover a lot of, this book covers so many things, not just the albums and the songs. Like you have Tom's first Saturday Night Live appearance, his first of 7 Rolling Stone covers, which is a funny story. He was in a hospital in Santa Monica recovering from a bout of tonsillitis when he saw it. But a lot of pressure to follow Damn the Torpedoes, but he did follow with one of my favorite Petty albums, which is Hard Promises, 1981. The Waiting, A Woman in Love, It's Not Me, and Something Big are the singles there. Now, here's a great example of the side of Tom Petty that is defiant when it comes to business. Talk about the battle he had with MCA over the price of the new album.
Well, he's a big act now, a big name. And so they wanted to slap on an extra dollar on their big name acts to make more money because, well, that's what they want to do. And Tom just thought that was wrong and took a stand on principle that, he was perfectly happy with the money he had made before on the last album. He didn't need the extra money, and he was sure the record company didn't need the extra money. And so he just wasn't going to let it out under that price.
They wanted to up it to $9.98,
Yeah.
$9.98.
He said, nope, nope. He held the line. And I guess he had sold enough records that they thought, okay, we'll give him this one. But yeah, there's a great picture of him. Maybe that was a Rolling Stone cover. It was in Rolling Stone. He's got the kind of sly grin and he's a ripping, you knew just
Ripping,
what I was going.
ripping the
He's
dollar
ripping the
bill.
dollar bill in half.
You say, but he also had some fun, threatening to title the album 898 in retaliation. So he was going to call it that. And then by the time he was pictured on the cover of Rolling Stone's July 23rd, 1981 issue, he's wearing a suit and tie and smiling as he rips a dollar bill in half. MCA had capitulated. Hard Promises would have a list price of $8.98. I didn't know this. Tom also had a further laugh. The album's cover shows him in a record store, which I know that, but standing by a crate of albums that are selling for $8.98. And he said it was just too irresistible to not do a little retouching. He joked. Yeah. Hey guys, back to the show just a bit, but first I want to tell you about an exclusive deal for Booked on Rock viewers. Get 15% off any purchase at oldglory.com. Over 300,000 officially licensed items covering music, sports, entertainment, and pop culture. Merchandise featuring legendary music artists like Bob Marley, The Beatles, Grateful Dead, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and many more. Go to oldglory.com and make sure to use the promo code BookedOnRock. Also find a link in this episode's description or just go to bookedonrock.com and click on My Deals. We have a chapter covering Petty's duet with Stevie Nicks, Stop Dragging My Heart Around, a huge hit in the summer of 81. Then comes 1982's Long After Dark, You Got Lucky, Straight Into Darkness, Change of Heart are the singles. Chapter 21 covers the video for You Got Lucky with the quote, "It changed everything." Talk about the importance of that video for Tom Petty, because not every artist from his generation or who came out in the 70s embraced MTV the way he did.
Yeah, well, you can find them on YouTube and you see the early videos that they did were basically just performance videos, which frankly, a lot of times I like those. Sometimes the too elaborate ones got carried away. Well, I don't suppose people make videos much anymore. It doesn't seem to be a big thing. They'll put out what? A lyric video.
Right.
That's what you get on.
Yep.
That's a lot easier. You don't have to pay for a set dresser.
Yes, a lot less expensive.
or a costumer.
Let's hope it goes viral. That's the new thing now, viral.
But this one, this was interesting because it has the long intro, and videos rarely had intros like that. They were usually, like a single, 3 minutes in and out. But having an intro where the band arrives in, they're in the desert and it's this decrepit place. Sorry, got that out. Decrepit place, abandoned building and
Mad Max type of theme.
Yeah, very much emulating or maybe influenced by that. And I think I read some of the vehicles they ride in came from the TV production of Logan's Run, using those old sets.
Yeah.
But another thing that's interesting, and I'd heard that MTV later had issues with this kind of thing, but you don't really see the band lip sync. They turn on the boombox and you hear the music playing, but you don't really see them getting up and playing their instruments and miming as we're used to seeing. I think it's just there's some TV screens all around, and on the TV screens you see film of them doing that, but they're not doing it in the main video. And I'd heard that one reason the video for Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill was not aired on MTV was because they don't lip sync during it. The Kate and her male dancer are dancing between themselves, but it's a good video. But maybe because this was the early days of MTV, When and they really in the early days they just showed music videos. They didn't have all those reality shows or even MTV News. Well, I guess they did have kind of short little news breaks, but not like Kurt Loder at his news desk.
Primarily videos. Speaking of MTV, this Heartbreakers Beach Party video, this was a bootlegged item for many years. Tell us about this video. Cameron Crowe made it. It only aired once on MTV.
Yeah, Cameron just has his memoir out now, and I'm wondering if he talks about it in there. He may have, because I think it was possibly the first directorial effort of his. And he knew the Heartbreakers because they'd written about him for Rolling Stone. You might remember he was a journalist at Rolling Stone and I think Cream before going on to write and then direct screenplays. Um, but yeah, what I read was that there's a lot of live concert footage in there, and so MTV was worried about rights or something, or who knows what they worry about, odd kind of things. We can't play that Michael Jackson video because it's not rock. So who knows what their decisions were. Um, but I found it on the streaming on the web somewhere. You can find things if you look. So that's how I got to see it and see what it was, and it's really kind of it's a documentary about the band, but it's also jokey. It's not, presented in this serious with the narrator and all this kind of thing. It's in fact the interview segments are almost a parody of a documentary, but there is live footage that's fun. And then let's see, was it? I can't remember if I turned in the manuscript yet or if it was right at the end. But last year, I think in conjunction with, and I forget which album it was that was being reissued. Some album was being reissued, a Petty album. And as part of that promotion, they had a couple theatrical screenings of the film at local theaters. They had one here in Seattle that I went to, and they would have had similar ones probably just in big markets. But no song, no word on if it will ever be um, released,
Officially
on a
released.
officially released streaming platform. It seemed, from what I remember, I think it was slightly edited from the original version because I think the original version had a few more references to groupies or having fun with groupies, something like that.
Okay.
Nothing big, but just, and I don't remember that in the reissue. So I thought, oh, I guess maybe they clean that up a bit.
Yeah, but these are the types of things that are in the book. Like I never knew about that. So that was interesting to read about that. I mentioned Don't Come Around Here No More, and that's from Southern Accents from 1985. Another one of my all-time favorite Petty albums. Don't Come Around Here No More, Rebels, and Make It Better, Forget About Me are the three singles in that video. That video topped You Got Lucky. Petty as the
Oh
Mad
yeah,
Hatter,
kind of natural.
the song wasn't actually intended for Tom Petty initially. Right? This was Stevie Nicks. It was to be a song for her, and it's based on a true story.
Yeah, where she had met Dave Stewart when he was still in Eurythmics, and they were traveling around the U.S. In their first big flush of U.S. fame, because I think they were bigger in the U.K. before they broke big over here. Um, and they got together, but then like the next morning, she was in between seeing different people. It was like, just get out. I can't have you here anymore. And Dave's like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, they're in LA. There's plenty of other distractions you can find. So he wasn't really put out by that. Um,
Stevie. Don't come around here no more.
you can hear her say that
You
too,
can
can't you?
say that, yes. But yeah, it turned into a hit. And then she said, no, it just doesn't fit in with my next album or something like that. And she said, okay, here, Tom, you want it?
Is this the one where, she hears like the rough demo or something and she's saying,
I think so.
well, what can I add to this? You've done it. You've taken this song from me. This can't be my song anymore.
Yeah, it benefited Tom. Yeah, Gillian Gaar is the author of Tom Petty, The Life and Music. Chapters on Petty's Live Aid appearance, Farm Aid, bonding with Bob Dylan, they're in there too. Of course, their tour with Bob Dylan, Tom and the Heartbreakers. And there's an album that's sometimes forgotten that came out prior to Full Moon Fever, 1987's Let Me Up, I've Had Enough, featuring Jammin' Me, All Mixed Up, Think About Me as the singles. Things are moving along quite nicely here until May 17th, 1987, when Tom's house burned down. This was not an accident.
Now, that was weird. I don't remember hearing about that at the time. And it wasn't something I knew about him until working on this book. But yeah, someone set fire to his house. The
While they're in the
investigators,
house too. They're all having breakfast, I think he said.
yeah, yeah. And it was his wife's birthday. And they were,
That's right.
going to be
Yeah.
celebrating. And one of their daughters, thankfully, was sleeping over at a friend's house. And I don't know, I guess if they got up at a regular time, it wasn't unusually early, like, 4 a.m. or something. But yeah, they were there having breakfast. And he thought, oh, what's that? Some wire gone bad or something. But then no, no, it's the house and it's on fire. And it sounds like it burned pretty quickly, because he talked about trying to put some of the fire out with a hose, and the hose melted in his hands. And his housekeeper got mildly burned, but thankfully that was all that happened to them. They were able to get out, and much of the house was destroyed. I mean, you think about that, losing your stuff, that would be hard, whoever you are. But it seems that a lot of the studio and his instruments and his tapes were preserved, so that was a lucky break for
He
him.
mentioned that.
But still, it wasn't a place he could live. And then he had thought it was an accident, that yes, faulty wiring, something like that. But then the investigator said, no, we've looked and it's clearly arson. And they found a hole had been cut in the back fence and this kind of thing. And he was just stunned. Who would want to kill me and my family? And he, the comments he made on it, he said he just, he had no idea who would want to. He didn't even, and it never has been solved.
Never saw a case went cold. That's it. Yeah. I mean, that's something that somebody should do some investigation into and find out, because that whoever did that should be brought to justice if they're still around. But I mean, that really that really shook him up. Now I think he rebuilt the house on the same location, but who was it? Somebody? Oh, it was Annie Lennox too.
Annie
That was
Lennox, speaking of the other Eurythmics tie.
she did him a real solid and made sure he got him and his family got a place to stay, got clothing and all that.
Yeah, I mean, he was going out on tour soon, and he just went ahead with the tour. I mean, I suppose why not, instead of just stay home brooding about it. And then it seemed like, he kind of had that laconic way of talking, and he'd be at a concert saying, well, yeah, I had an interesting week. Like last week, my
Right.
house burned down, but they didn't get this. And he holds up his guitar. I was kind of calm. He's saying, yeah, my house burned down. I lost most of my possessions.
But again, the defiance and I won't back down, I think was partially inspired by that too. Like you can't keep me down. And that song, of course, along with so many others, became huge hits off of Full Moon Fever. Part three, the book covers the years 1987 to 1996. It's titled It's Good to Be King, and Tom Petty was indeed the king. This resurgence of pop success starts with the Traveling Wilburys. Talk about how that project came to be and how it leads to Full Moon Fever.
I'm a big Beatles fan, so I was very interested in everything to do with the Wilburys. And I've often thought how, well, when working on this book, I often thought about how Tom was among the 73 million Americans who watched the Beatles in their first Ed Sullivan appearance on February 9th, 1964. And, he's about 13 or so. And so just think if you'd told him, in about 20 some years, you're going to make a record with that lead guitarist. I mean, he'd have been floored. He wouldn't have believed you. It's, yeah, in what universe? But yeah, it happened. And what I like about that record in particular, certainly the first one, is that it was made just for the fun of making music. They weren't trying to have a hit. They didn't market test it to see, oh, we should drop this song because the audience didn't like it as much, that type of thing. That, it just came out of George Harrison needed a B-side for one of his singles from Cloud Nine. And he was in LA, and all these other guys happened to be in LA. Bob Dylan was there. Oh, you can record at my home studio. Okay. They bring Tom along, and oh, they all love Roy Orbison, so let's get him in, and Jeff Lynne. And, they go over to Bob's and kind of hash out Handle with Care, and then they have dinner and kind of figure out the lyrics and then go back in. And it's just, this relaxed experience of making music together. And then the record company guys hear it and they say, this is too good for a B-side. Would you consider making an album? And I said, oh, okay, why not? They had had so much fun initially. Yeah, yeah, let's keep it going. So I think that's why you feel such a genuine warmth that comes from that record because
Oh,
they're
I
just
love that
laid
record.
back.
Yeah.
It's almost as if you were hanging out at one of their homes
Yes.
and they're in the next room playing the songs, and it's just that kind of relaxed, everyday, homespun kind of feeling.
Yes. And I believe the great Jim Keltner on drums on that
Mm.
album, I believe. And they wanted to name him a Wilbury, but he was like, no, I want to be behind the scenes. But yeah, I absolutely love that album from start to finish. It's one of my all-time favorites. So because Jeff Lynne produced that, that kind of leads to the fact that Jeff Lynne produced that Wilbury's album. That leads to him producing Full Moon Fever.
Yeah, well, I guess you could kind of see Tom's working with him on the Wilburys as sort of a test run. This is what this guy is like to work with. And yeah, he's also, I've heard, kind of an exacting fellow and likes things done in this specific way that people don't always agree with. But he obviously connected well with Tom. That was Full Moon Fever, you said?
Full Moon Fever, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
which is amazing to think that MCA Records rejected it. I don't even know where to begin with that one. I mean, it's got "I Won't Back Down," "Running Down a Dream," "Free Falling," "A Face in the Crowd," "You're So Bad." Those are all singles. They rejected it, but then what led to them changing their mind? I think after the Wilburys album became a success, they said, "Oh no, there was a new regime with
New,
MCA. There was
yeah,
a new."
yeah. Uh, I think it may have been Irving Azoff the first time, though I'd want to double check that. But yeah, he left. I mean, when the earlier administration had heard the record, they said there were no singles. We don't hear any singles, which is incredible when you think about it now. But especially well, that would have been the 80s, wouldn't it? So yeah, in the 80s and 90s on, a lot of the major record companies are consolidating, and there were a lot of regime changes. And certainly if you were a smaller artist, that was not necessarily so good for you because, an A&R person would be laid off or fired, whatever, and then all of their bands would get dropped. They wouldn't just get farmed out to other A&R people. So Tom was too big for that to happen. Um, but I guess he was lucky that he had that delay coming in, because then you had new people in charge and they were like, well, hey, this sounds great. Yeah, let's put this album out. so so that must have given him quite a bit of satisfaction.
He never planned on it being a solo project. It came just came naturally. I mean, Mike Campbell was there with him and they're jamming in I think it was Mike Campbell's garage, and it just kind of happened. Now I know some of the Heartbreakers are a little, they're a little hurt by that. They weren't asked to be part of it, but he did. He promised everybody the Heartbreakers are not done, and he was true to that promise. He came back with Into the Great Wide Open in 1991, which is a great album. Learning to Fly, Into the Great Wide Open, those are big singles. Then the Greatest Hits album in 1993 with a brand new hit with Mary Jane's Last Dance. I mean, how many times do you have a Greatest Hits album where there's a brand new hit on it that you add to it? I mean, he was on such a roll. But this is the last time Stan Lynch recorded with the Heartbreakers. He's also on the cover of Thunderclap Newman's Something in the Air. But yeah, there was something in the air. Stan was difficult during those sessions with Rick Rubin. You write about it in the book.
Yeah, brought in. Well, the Heartbreakers, I think, were always felt a bit threatened when Tom would do his solo stuff. Because actually, generally, Mike Campbell would be involved, I think, pretty much all the time, because he was like his right hand man. He was always there with him. So that must have rankled some of the members as well. So I think they were threatened, but then he wouldn't go off and do a solo tour. He would just do a Heartbreakers tour and add some solo songs in it. So I think, they relaxed and didn't mind that. But yeah, Stan didn't like the way the new songs for the Greatest Hits album were put together. And he didn't like Rick Rubin's instructions on, oh, make it sound like this record, make it sound like that record. And he just didn't like Rick Rubin. And there had been other tensions. So I don't think it was a big surprise when he left.
I think
Um,
he knew it was coming.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, the later biography that was done of Tom Petty with Tom's cooperation, but he insisted on his authorization. He wanted the author, whose name escapes me now.
Was it Warren Zanes?
Yeah, yeah, thank you, thank you. I mean, what's interesting about that book is that he got Stan Lynch to talk to him. So I mean, sure, you want to hear his side too, of course, don't you? So yeah, he goes into detail about that session. Stan was not going to be involved and did not want to talk to him, but Zanes kept asking and returning, and eventually won him over. And I think that makes the book stronger.
Sure. Well, what's funny too is he gave Rick Rubin a hard time, but Rick Rubin's the guy who talked Tom into bringing Stan Lynch back in because he said, "Look, you got a greatest hits album. All of the tracks feature Stan on it." Because at the time they were working on Wildflowers, and Steve Ferroni was already there, I believe. And
Mhm.
but but he's Rick Rubin's the one who said, "Look, a couple new songs. Let's have Stan do them." So
Yeah,
he's
that's
being
right.
difficult to Rick Rubin. Rick Rubin's the guy that he's the reason he was there, and Stan gets a nice paycheck off that Greatest Hits album. So
Yeah.
Steve Ferroni, very different style from Stan's, but it worked, and Petty loved that direction that sound was going in, and apparently the fans did too, or clearly the fans did because you don't know how it feels. You wreck me. It's good to be king. All from Wildflowers, which was a huge success, and you quote heartbreaker Ben Montench in the book. He told journalist David Brown, Tom would always say that's the best album we ever made. Was it the change of the drummer? Was it Rick Rubin? What do you think that led to Tom being so spot on for that record and reinvigorated?
Well, it was a solo record, wasn't it?
It was a solo
Yeah,
record,
yeah, even though it had
technically.
a lot of heartbreakers on
Again,
it.
yeah, it's got his buddies, the Heartbreakers are there, including Mike Campbell, who, like you say, he was his right hand man.
Maybe when he's making a Heartbreakers record, he feels that, okay, this has to be a Heartbreakers album. Whereas when it's a solo album, he can do what he wants. And, he doesn't have, maybe that was a sort of self imposed restriction he had. And he just felt freer to be more creative instead of saying, oh, no, that wouldn't be right for the Heartbreakers. But he's not making a Heartbreakers album. So maybe that was it. I mean, it's actually, yeah, one of the most acclaimed albums of his career, actually.
Do you put it up there at the top? I mean, I have friends who say it's his best. I don't think it is, but it's up there for
Well,
me.
I things like Southern
Southern
accents or
accents,
Full
yeah.
Moon Fever better. But yeah, it's up there. Sure, sure.
And then he released, there was a bunch of songs that he didn't include on there that would be released in a deluxe edition version many years later. And some
Yeah.
of those songs are outstanding. There's one called it's got Heaven in the title, and it's I can't recall. I don't have my phone around me here. I could look it up, but yeah, some great stuff on there. But part four of the book covers the years 1997 to 2010. There's a 20 show residency at the Fillmore, another in 99, and the band's on fire. But there are some demons creeping up on Tom in the 90s. So the people knew him. It was a shock when they learned that he had become addicted to heroin. You cover this period in chapter 49. What led to Tom going down that hole, and how did he eventually come out of it?
Well, I think some of it had to do with the divorce he had around that time, which was definitely painful and somewhat acrimonious, it sounds like. He had a lot of difficulties and arguments and things with his wife, so that wasn't so good. He, in talking about it, he sounds kind of surprised himself that he ended up in that state because he never had the reputation as being some wild party man. I mean, yeah, drinking and everyone smoked pot, but you never previously read stories of him, running down the street smashing windows or something. He just wasn't that kind of
Just
guy.
wasn't that guy. Yeah.
He always seemed like he was too laid back. Um, but from what I know from writing about it, is that heroin seems like a drug that can kind of sneak up on you. Like the first few times are okay, and you think, oh, I can handle this, not realizing it's sort of sneaking up and sinking its claws into you. And for a while, it seems like it was something that I don't know if you'd say that he was ashamed or embarrassed or a combination of both, but that he didn't really talk about or acknowledge it. I think once he got through and put it behind him, he just did not want to dwell on it and go back there. Because when Peter Bogdanovich made the big documentary about him, Running Down a Dream, they talked about it. He apparently talked about his heroin use for the documentary, but then later he insisted that it be cut and not used. So that didn't come out. It wasn't until the Zane's biography that he talked more about it. I think also he did have a concern that you hear this a lot from some people. Well, I didn't want to glamorize it, have people think, oh, wow, that's cool. He did it. I should do it too. Whereas when you read about the circumstances, it just does not sound glamorous at all. Just hiding in your house and your house falls apart because you're not doing anything. You're just sitting there brooding. So yeah, it doesn't really seem like much to glamorize there. Yeah, he was divorced and had moved and was just living in some, it was still in LA,
Cabin.
but it was one of, yeah, kind of a more rural part of the area. So yeah, I think he also felt kind of isolated. You'd feel isolated anyway, even if you weren't doing drugs. But heroin is actually a pretty isolating drug. It's not as common. You think of, well, pot is being more communal. People pass a joint around, right? But heroin addicts kind of keep to
Sure.
themselves.
It's not a party
Um,
drug.
yeah, yeah. And they don't want to be around non-heroin users any more than a non-heroin user wants to be around them. So it's almost like this sort of secret society, almost underground.
He finally pulled himself out of it. Obviously, at some point, he realized I gotta do something about it. And credit to him, he did. By the way, the song "Somewhere Under Heaven" is the one from the Wildflower
Oh,
session.
okay.
Oh my God, that song's how that didn't end up on the original version, I don't know. But if for those listening to this haven't heard that song, give that a listen and tell me that wouldn't have been a huge hit. "Somewhere Under Heaven." He did record "Echo" from 1999 during that period. Still a solid album. You've got a few of my favorite Petty songs on there. "Room at the Top" and "Swinging." "Free Girl Now" was another single on that one. His last produced by Rick Rubin because he was a little irritated with Rick. He because he was leaving the project early to work with the Red Hot Chili Peppers on "Californication." But you write about how Rick told Tom's daughters about his drug problem. Do you think that also led to the falling out?
Well, it may have been part of it. It certainly couldn't have helped.
Right.
Um, but I'm sure Rick was just thinking, what can I do? He thought that by telling the daughters that the daughters would obviously talk to their father, that might help Tom want to get off drugs.
Sure.
It's hard to know what to do when you're dealing with an addict. So I'm sure they made up eventually. Well, probably once Tom got out of all that. You're not thinking straight when you're under the influence of that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm sure he was very unhappy about it. Um, I think he had a new girlfriend by then, and even she didn't know he was on heroin. They weren't living together, which helped. But
We know too he lost Howie Epstein to heroin. I think that was Howie's drug too. That took him down.
yeah, I think their Rock Hall appearance when they were inducted at the Rock Hall, I think that was the last time they saw him. He just, yeah, was not in good shape.
The book covers every important part of Tom's life and his late career: his Hollywood Walk of Fame dedication, his participation in America, a tribute to heroes after 9/11, the Rock Hall induction that you just mentioned. You cover the 2002 album, The Last DJ, 2006's Highway Companion, 2010's Mojo, which is one of my favorite albums from Petty's later years, 2014's Hypnotic Eye, his 30th and 40th anniversary tours, the return of Mudcrutch, the Super Bowl halftime show. It's all in there. You lead off the chapter on his death with, quote, "It was a shocking end because it was so sudden and unexpected. Just over a week after the Heartbreakers' 2017 tour had ended, Tom was found unconscious at his Malibu home. He was rushed to UCLA Medical Center, but died later that day. He was 66 years old." I think there is still some clarification needed when you talk about the cause of his death, because some thought he had relapsed. What exactly happened? This was more because of physical pain he was in.
Yeah, when we're rehearsing for that final tour, he'd fallen and said it was a hairline fracture in his hip. And his widow by then later said that he didn't cancel the tour because he didn't want to disappoint the fans, which, in retrospect, obviously that's quite a mistake. And especially, for him, I think his fans would still have been there if
Of
it
course.
postponed for a year later. But you're rehearsing, so that means you already have things lined up, tour crew, all that kind of thing. And I think maybe he didn't appreciate how serious it could become. And, not that I know him, but maybe there's just also some fear, and you don't want to think that it can become serious because medical things can be scary. And So he just went ahead with his tour, and that just aggravated the hairline fracture. So it became a break, and it was apparently very, very painful. And
Oh,
he didn't have the kind of show like a Janet Jackson where you've got a lot of dancing and choreography, but still just being on your feet for 2 hours plus, whatever, that put a strain on it. And his band members would kind of help, he'd have to lean on them to get on stage. And he just began taking increasing numbers of painkillers. And
it was like a toxic combination of things he was taking.
for the pain, to relieve that pain. And again, I thought, well, since he knew he had this issue, why hadn't he made arrangements to go into a hospital soon after he stopped touring? I mean, you have all these people around you that can set up that kind of thing. And hip surgery is pretty common. It's in fact, I had a friend that went through it a few years ago. Um, you have
It's
hip
quick
surgery.
recovery.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
my mom had it. Quick recovery.
I mean, these days you're just in the hospital unless there's a complication. You're in the hospital for just a handful of days, not even a week.
Yep.
So it would have been over and done. And yeah, pretty low risk because it's so common. And yeah, they get you up. I saw my friend did. They get you up moving right away, and you do exercises and things. And wow, what better place to do physical therapy than California, actually, all
Right.
that outside and all that. But yeah, I think in the medical examiner's report, it looked like he was taking some painkillers that had been prescribed and some he had not. So I think when you do that kind of thing, it's like you're rolling the dice every time you do that. And of course, your own body metabolism changes all the time. And I think that explains some sudden deaths like that. The same amount of whatever it was would not have had that effect on your body last week, but this week it does. So that's why your body's changing all the time.
Oh,
But yeah, it
I
wasn't like someone, say, who had a long-standing drug problem and was in and out of rehab. And so when they die, well, like Amy Winehouse, sad death. That was, yeah, I really liked her stuff, but not surprising, right?
right.
When you heard about your death, you're probably, oh, that's too bad. But how surprised were you?
Shocked. I mean, just and every time I hear and read about it or just hearing you talk about it, it's like, man, if you could just hit the rewind button, go back a day before and say, Tom, don't do it. Just get the
Yeah,
surgery. You'll be fine.
yeah.
Like as a fan, I'd be like, don't worry about it, man. We're gonna be here next year when you come back.
Like I was saying, Amy's was not a surprise when she died, though horrible to hear about. But when you heard about Tom's, that was completely unexpected. And especially since the tour had just stopped and ended, rather not stopped. And there were the great reviews. He really got out on this high note. So you think, wow, wow, it was like this triumphant moment. So to hear this later, it was the kind of thing, well, like I say, about a week later. And it was the kind of thing where when you first heard it, you didn't think it was true. No, no, that can't be right.
And he was still on top of his game musically. I mean, Mojo really had me feeling good about where he was headed. And I loved that sound. He was still excited about making music. And next thing you know, he's gone. Now let's finish with Tom Petty's musical legacy. This is really cool. In the book, you break it down. You talk about his legacy and how the numbers speak for themselves in terms of YouTube views and Spotify streams and sales of his music. I mean, his music is as popular as ever.
Yeah, and you look at the posthumous releases that have come out, and you really appreciate the archives that guy has because they put out these box sets with all this unreleased material. A lot of it, like you were saying about the Wildflower stuff, like why did this make the main album? There were some B-sides for Southern Accents that was like that. So yeah, just this wealth of material. The live stuff too. I mean, they could probably start issuing live shows and have those releases go on for years. Complete live shows, I mean, because it seems like they taped a lot of it.
Millions of streams on Spotify, millions of views on YouTube still. Yeah, his music, it looks like it's going to be around for a long time. Tom Petty, The Life and Music. The book is out now. You can find it wherever books are sold and look for it at your nearest bookstore. BookedOnRock.com is where you can go to find your nearest independent bookstore. And Gillian, people can find you online where?
Let's see. I have a Facebook page that's Gillian Gaar Writer, just all one word with no spaces. And that's, I guess they call it a fan page. You don't send a friend request or anything. And I'm on Twitter or X, and Blue Sky with just my name.
Gillian, thanks again for coming on, and congratulations on this book. As you can tell, I'm a huge Tom Petty fan, so I love talking about every book that you've written that I've had you on for. I'm a huge. You've done the Queen book, the
Oh, good.
Springsteen book, Elton John. I had you on for
Wow,
Tom
that's a
Petty
long
here.
time ago. So this has been a couple of years
Yeah.
then.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, Gillian, thanks again.
Well, thank you. Had a great time.